What did Shadow Chancellor Jeremy Hunt say this morning? Hunt said Labour's comments about inheriting the worst economy since World War II were spin to lay the ground for tax rises. He said the numbers were crystal clear before the election, and Labour can't claim things are worse than feared. Hunt said he will not be the new leader of the Conservatives, but declined to suggest an alternative. Asked why the Conservatives were hammered at the election, he said high immigration, the upheavals of 2022, and increasing taxes, without saying how they would come back down. Pressed on when the Conservatives would have been able to cut tax, had they been re-elected, he said they wouldn't have been able to do it immediately. He said the party's future success lies in the center ground. He said that included controls on migration, and restraint on spending. Who will be new Tory leader? Not me, says Hunt. Laura now asks Hunt who the new Conservative Party leader will be. It won't be me, I won't put my hat into the ring, he says, before declining to suggest an alternative. He says the party will have a difficult conversation, but it must be honest about why it lost people's trust. We need to earn it back by being absolutely clear that we do have solutions, and we're going to hold the government to account, taking into account the things we got wrong before, he says. Pressed on the direction of the party, he says they should be in the center ground. I think ordinary, decent British families want controls on migration, they want the government to show restraint on spending and keep taxes down, they want welfare to be reformed so it's fair to people who get up early and work hard. I think that is the center ground, that is where the Conservatives should be, he says. Biden's election run a matter for the American people. Turning to U.S. politics, Reeves is asked her opinion on U.S. President Joe Biden's re-election campaign. Reeves won't be led to answer and says it's a matter for the American people, but does speak about her financial counterpart across the Atlantic, Janet Yellen. She says Yellen has been an inspiration and that she admires some of the measures the U.S. has taken to grow its economy, such as reindustrializing former industrial heartlands. Reeves says the U.S. has outperformed Britain in terms of prosperity in recent years and there is a lot we can learn. So is Labour control freakish? Labour's plans to nationalize the railways and form its own energy investment company. So, after the previous planning exchange, Laura asks whether Reeves thinks government knows best. Reeves points to Labour's housing plan, which involves local targets for new houses, as an example of power in the community. She says there must be government-mandated housing targets because house ownership is going backwards, fewer people can get into the market, and rents are through the roof. Kunzberg puts it to Reeves that the level of involvement proposed by the government is control freakish. Reeves responds that most people think the projects, such as the rail nationalization, is an improvement and that Labour was elected to change things. Things aren't going to carry on as they were, she says. We're not about the status quo. Reeves pressed on whether she would turn down pay advice. Kunzberg pushes Reeves on whether she would, in principle, ignore recommendations for public sector pay increases. As a reminder, pay review bodies are recommending a 5.5% increase for teachers and some NHS workers. Reeves deflects the question, saying, "We are in a situation where there are huge spending pressures and our economy is so weak it is not generating the tax revenues that we need to fund our public services. This is why we have to grow our economy, otherwise, we'll just continue for the next 5 years having these conversations of how can you afford this, how can you afford that. She also again stresses the cost of not settling, in terms of recruitment and possible strike action. Microsoft working around the clock to provide support. We can bring you some more from Microsoft's latest statement now. The 8.5 million Windows devices affected by the IT outage accounts for less than 1% of all machines worldwide. Microsoft says that the broad economic and societal impacts shows the use of CrowdStrike by enterprises that run many critical services. Microsoft can be very accurate on how many Windows devices were disabled by the outage as it has performance telemetry to many by their internet connections. The firm says it's working around the clock to provide ongoing updates and support, with help from CrowdStrike. The tech giant, which stresses that this was not an issue caused by its software, says the incident highlights how important it is for companies to prioritize operating with safe deployment and disaster recovery using the mechanisms that exist. How hackers could take advantage of IT outage. Whenever there is a major news event, especially one linked to technology, hackers respond by tweaking their existing methods to take into account the fear and uncertainty. We saw the same with the COVID-19 pandemic when hackers adjusted their phishing email attacks to offer information about the virus and even pretend to have an antidote in order to hack people and organizations. Because the IT outage has been a global news story, we are seeing hackers capitalize. According to researchers at SecureWorks, there has already been a sharp rise in CrowdStrike-themed domain registrations, hackers registering new websites made to look official and potentially trick IT managers or members of the public into downloading malicious software or handing over private details. The advice is mainly for IT managers who are the ones being affected by this as they try to get their organizations back online. But individuals too might be targeted, so experts are warning to be cautious and only act on information from the official CrowdStrike channels. Airports and train operators' IT systems working as normal, says Transport Secretary. We've had an update from Transport Secretary Louise Hay, who says the situation has improved. Writing on X, she says, pleased to report that UK airports and train operators have their IT systems back up and working as normal. We are in constant communication with industry. There continues to be no known safety or security issues arising from the outage. Some delays and a small number of cancelled flights are expected today. Train operators are no longer reporting cancellations and delays as a result of the IT failure. Here on the news desk, we're still hearing of continued disruption across industries, including knock-on delays for flights and instances of continued problems in the healthcare sector. We'll keep you updated as we hear more. Heathrow sees knock-on effect of IT outage as hundreds queue for replacement flights. Heathrow was always going to be very busy today, with the start of the school holidays for many families. But the airport is now facing an additional challenge. Hundreds of passengers who were unable to travel yesterday are standing in long queues trying to find alternative flights. Most of the people I've spoken to remain in good spirits, but some are worried about where they will stay tonight if they can't find a flight. The prospect of bedding down on the floor of the terminal isn't appealing. There are lots of staff on hand. Additional workers have been brought in to try to provide as much information as possible. But almost 50 flights to and from the UK have already been cancelled today, so even though the IT systems are working, the knock-on effects of yesterday's outage are continuing to be felt. China largely unaffected by outage. While most of the world was grappling with the blue screen of death yesterday, one country managed to escape the outage largely unscathed: China. The reason is simple. China is not as reliant on Microsoft as the rest of the world. Domestic companies such as Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei are the dominant cloud providers. Over recent years, government organizations, businesses, and infrastructure operators have increasingly been replacing foreign IT systems with domestic ones. Some analysts like to call this parallel network the splinternet. This is partly a reflection of China's sophisticated tech landscape, but there's also a political dimension. In becoming self-sufficient when it comes to IT, Chinese authorities can also more easily control how citizens interact with technology. It's also seen as a way of shoring up national security, in a similar vein to some Western countries' banning of Huawei technology.